Hello and welcome to the channel. I will tell you interesting scary stories from Reddit and not only. Do not forget to support the author of the story. I will leave his credits in the description. I also hope for your support of my channel in the form of likes and comments. I really appreciate it. Get comfortable in your bed, put on your headphones, and turn off the lights. It's going to be a night of nightmares. We're starting. There is Gacy's clown palette, right? Someone puts it on, they start hearing voices. It's said that the two people who tried it on last, a young intern and an officer having an affair, both died. One that same night with a gunshot to the head, and the other later in an institution from refusing to eat. Then there's the infamous 1911 that can be heard clicking in its bag of blood on the shelf, still trying to cock itself. There are others, aren't there? Mostly bagged and stored in police custody, with some evidence rooms packed with more haunted guilt than Ed and Lorraine Warren's museum, never seeing the light of day until they're shown in one of those straight-to-TV documentaries. Cursed things created in the last 100 years, because it's not as if evil sleeps, not as if in the absence of God in the past millennium means that the devil is gone. If anything, it means the present reign is now, and what happened to my family was any other page in these uncertain times. Though it didn't feel that way when it happened. Mother and I were sitting in the kitchen nook in the morning, a three-piece window cut in diamond facets, with a wooden bench that peered out to the lawn. It was my favorite place in the house. I was a little girl then, and asking her silly questions about life and love. "How do you die 1,000 times?" I asked. Mother brushed my hair away from my face and said, "You loved the wrong person twice. The first time you die 999 times. The second time, only once." "Then I shall never fall for love," I answered jubilantly. "For love seems painful." Mother smiled and looked into my eyes. "If love is pain, then come here, let me hurt you," as she drew me close. That afternoon, my father abandoned us. He had run off with his secretary while I was at school, taking anything that wasn't bolted down, except for the twins and I. It was also the day that Mother started speaking into the cookie jar. It hadn't always started life as a cookie jar. I don't know what it had been before, but I had a feeling that it was much older than it looked. The thing was made of thick clay that was fire-burnt. Its belly was round and could have been a pot at one point. It was deep too, enough for a child's forearm to disappear beneath the rim. The pale orange lid didn't match at all. It seems to have been added later. The jar had sat above the shelf near the fridge so that the twins wouldn't be able to reach it, as they were always scraping the bottom for chocolate chip cookies, and according to Mother, were beginning to resemble tiny cherubs. I'd come home that day, unaware of the scene that I would be walking into. I opened the front door and dropped my bag off near the coat hanger. Before I could announce my return, I hear a thick crunching of bones splintering down the hall to the kitchen. It sounded like when our neighbor's horse ran through a gopher field, its front legs snapping, as the beautiful thing came crashing into the dirt. Back then, our neighbor, old John, came running out to the pasture, nearly sinking into a hole himself before he was able to kneel next to his beloved companion. He took one look at the mangled leg and brushed the horse's hair. "You'll never be able to run again." I feel as if the horse understood him because it started crying. Later, Billy Braxton from school told me that horses are too dumb to cry, that water only leaves their eyes to clear debris, and that I was stupid for believing such a thing. The old man, too, for not putting the beast down. That sound was once again clear as day in my ears as I walked toward the kitchen. the pictures on the wall shuddering in their frames as I passed. I could see a picture myself in one of them, juddering, making both of our lower lips tremble. When I stepped into the room, the twins huddled around my knees. I could feel their tiny bodies shivering as I watched Mother pound the cleaver into the butcher's block, missing several times and sinking the blade into the wooden countertop. She was whispering and cleaving, waving the steel in the air at times when she pulled her arm back and dropped it down like a hammer. "Stop!" She looked up, her eyes swirling in anger for the disruption. And in that moment, I wanted to flee, to drag the twins with me if I must. But her stare chiseled me stone cold, unable to speak another word. In a blink, that look disappeared from her face, and I could once again recognize the woman in front of me, though I couldn't shake what I had witnessed. Who was the woman that had been staring at me earlier? And who was this woman now? Which one was real? Which one was fake? Or were they both real? Mother's look softened. "Come on," as she reached for the cookie jar on the shelf and turned it over. The chocolate chips rained from the mouth and onto the table. "Take one," she beckoned. The twins ran toward her, their fears forgotten, for they were young and resilient. I was still hesitant to approach as Mother opened the refrigerator and pulled out a pitcher. The scratched red lettering read, "Strauss. Milk?" She poured 4 glasses without waiting for an answer. She stuffed her half cookie into her mouth, brushing off the crumbs from her fingers before reaching into the jar to wipe it clean with the rag. "When I was little, your grandma had this swear jar in the kitchen. If anyone spoke a word that they shouldn't have, then they were to leave a halfpenny. Your grandfather and uncles broke the rules most often and were always found digging, down to the lint in their pockets to pay up." She put the jar onto the table. "I thought we'd start it back up." "But we don't have any money, Mommy." She stroked Joe's hair. "I know love. That's why we'll only swear into the jar, so no one can hear what we say. That's how we'll pay this debt." "I can curse?" Susie peeked as she took a bite out of a cookie, the other cookies in front of her, each with a single bite taken out. "You can say anything you want into the jar. Watch." Mother lowered her head into the hole, disappearing her nose and eyes below the rim until her entire face was sealed tightly against it. Her chest heaved as she screamed into it, but all I heard was the whoa, whoa, whoa vibrations of the clay kicking against the counter. It reminded me of whales being recorded underwater. After several seconds, Mother put both hands on either side of the jar and pulled it away, which caused a large suctioning noise that made Joe laugh. When her face reappeared, I could see the rim-marked welt still crimson around her face. She stared back at us with her eyes wide in renewed elation. "See? I feel much better. And it wasn't horrible, was it?" Joe and Susie shook their heads. "I couldn't even hear what you were saying," Joe assured her. "Me neither." Mother turned to look at me, and I shook my head a little. "Good," she smiled, putting the lid on and putting the jar back onto the top shelf in the corner. From that time on, Mother would take the jar down and scream into it instead of showing us her anger. And after she had done so, she seemed all better. There were even times when I would see her sitting at the dining table, the jar open, its lid rolling back and forth from the tip of her fingers as she spoke to it, like an old friend, telling it of our misdeeds, or moments of our lives, and even some of our secrets. That changed one spring when Mother started leaving the house mid-morning. She seemed happier, and the jar was seen less often on the dining table. We lived in a small town, so word spread quickly that Billy's dad Mr. Braxton, and Mother, had been spotted entering the local theater during the matinee on various days of the working week. 5 months later, they got married before the baby started showing. I never got to meet my little sister. She had come prematurely and didn't make it. Mother named her Cornelia and buried her in the yard next to the cherry tree. This seemed particularly hard on Mr. Braxton, who had lost his first wife during the birth of their second child. He turned to the bottle and spent many late nights out at the edge of town, leaving his son, Billy, with us. The twins didn't seem to mind Billy too much, but I couldn't get a single sentence in with that crude lad. He was always shouting and hammering away whenever we spoke, so I had nearly given up making peace. Instead, I threw the nastiness right back at him. As the nights wore on and Mr. Braxton's drinking got worse, the swearing jar spent more time on the dining table. Then one day, Mr. Braxton came home early. His clothes reeked of alcohol as he stumbled inside, his face a bloody red from the alcohol, as he dropped a glass onto the floor. It shattered to pieces. I gathered the twins up the stairs before they cut their toes. We huddled near the banister as we strained our ears below. "I told you it wasn't me," he slurred. "What are you talking about?" I heard Mother say. "You're drunk again." "I'm good," he says. "Down here, I'm all good. It's you who's filthy," he spits. "Mary Ann's just given birth. Healthy bouncing baby boy," he hiccuped. "And it's mine." "How could you do this to me?" Mother pieced together. "After John ran away." "Ran away?" Mr. Braxton scoffed. "You're still going with that? After John? Oh, shut up, and go tell your lies to your goddamn jar." I could hear cupboards opening as a glass is set on the table. "Billy," the man yelled. "Bill?" "Get the hell out of my house," Mother demanded. Gladly, he managed. "Bill," he called out again. "Big Bill," he shouted, before climbing the stairs. He rounded past us without even glancing down. "Bill," he shouted, as he threw open multiple doors, but they were all empty. "Billy," he shouted again, as he went back to the kitchen. "Where's my son?" he roared. The pots and pans hanging from the ceiling shook and clattered as the dining table shifted on its legs when I peered into the kitchen. "He's not here," Mother growled. "Where's my boy?" Mr. Braxton grabbed Mother and wrung her shoulders. "Where is he?" "How should I know? I'm not his mother." Mr. Braxton let her go and stumbled backward, laughing. "That's something you're right about." At those words, Mother started throwing things at him. I scurried back upstairs when a pot flew past me and crashed into the hall. I could hear them struggling for a bit, and the deafening boom of the fridge falling flat on its face, before an inaudible wail emerged into a full-on siren. It was so mind-numbingly loud that I had to cover my ears. The twins were crying when I closed my eyes. My heart drummed in my chest, beating itself as if trying to escape out of my throat and away from this noise, when it began to sound like crinkled parchment being pummeled in the kitchen before it suddenly stopped. The noise dropping dead silence into our house, completely gone. Even the walls stopped shaking. When I found the courage to walk downstairs, Mother was on the kitchen floor. Every cabinet and drawer was thrown open. All of their contents were strewn on the ground or stuck in the walls. Mother's dress was ripped on one side, and the jar sat between her legs. I watched as she got up and righted one of the shelves and placed the swearing jar back in its place. The jar looked the same as it always had, except for one key difference. The lid on top of it was now beet red. Locals would later report to the sheriff that they did perhaps see a man drunkenly stumble toward the creek where Bill often hung out with the other high schoolers. A quarry worker said he saw several men throughout the day wading through the shallow waters. One of those men even looked as if he was searching for something as night fell. All I know is that I never saw Mr. Braxton leave our kitchen, and no one would ever see him again. Many townsfolk assumed he drowned. Others think he left town after he sobered up once he realized what he had done to my mother, leaving with his Christian shame. When Billy got home that night, his stuff was packed in a suitcase on the porch. The door wasn't locked, but he never tried it. Billy took his stuff and left. I heard he caught wind that his father may have been spotted in Morrow County at a bar. It seemed plausible enough, so the boy hopped a train going in that direction. Around midnight, I went downstairs and found Mother sprawled on the kitchen floor. All of the lights were off, and only the moon laid on her figure. She was bent over the jar, speaking into it, crying to the endless bottom, as she couldn't bear to lose another man. I listened as she blamed herself for love and filled the jar with her blistering tears. After that, Mother was never quite the same. She was curt with me and even doted on Susie, but her hugs never felt as warm again. Even her food began to taste different when she had once been a wonderful cook before. Joe, her voice was stern these days with him. "Are you ready?" "Yes, Mommy, I'm all." "What did I tell you about calling me Mommy?" I could see her eyebrow raised dangerously. "You're the man of the house now. You need to start acting like it." He was all but 7 then. The year was 1983. Summer had come and gone, and the seasons were falling into winter. I watched as he sniffed the snot building in his nose back into his throat, as he swallowed it down and nodded. "Susan," she called out, her voice softer when my sister appeared. "Susie, do you want anything while we're out?" "Where are you going?" "To the market." Susie peered from between the balusters. "Could you get me some tangerines? I like the small round ones with the leaf still on them." Mother smiled. "I'll get you 6 oranges." "Tangerines, Mommy, not oranges." "Tangerines," she quoted back. I watched as Mother took Joe with her. He was never out of her sight these days. Whenever she left the house, he would accompany her. Other than school, he was chained to her side. I watched as the two of them disappeared. "I'm bored," Susie spoke from behind me. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I had been skittish for several weeks now, feeling like eggshells beneath me. "Want to play outside?" She smiled and nodded. We got out to the yard and played tag for a bit. But that is only so much fun for 2 people. So we eventually started picking through the grass for any loose objects left over from the Civil War. Old John had once found arrowheads at the corner of his lot. I was searching through the field when I saw a gopher appear. I was reminded of the gnarled leg of the horse, but I screamed because of the finger clenched between its 2 yellow-stained front teeth. The disconnected joint was blue and rotten, the sinew falling off the bone, yet the gnarled fingernail had continued to grow even after death. It twisted vividly backwards, seemingly curling at me to come closer. I watched as the gopher disappeared with the finger back into its hole. "Did you see that?" I nearly jumped out of my knickers when I felt old John's breath on my hair. "Did you see that?" he repeated. I shook my head. "You saw it. I know you saw it." He took off his cap and wiped his brow. "That was a man's finger, weren't it?" In 2 days, everyone in town seemed to have heard about the finger. We couldn't leave our property without getting dirty looks. Mother waved it away and loudly quoted James 1:26. It wouldn't be 2 days later, when I was woken during midnight, that I realized how far word had spread. The screen door croaked loudly as it opened. I could hear the heavy boot steps fall as they headed toward the kitchen. I could hear Mother's voice, and then Billy's. They were yelling by the time I rubbed the sleep out of my eyes. I got downstairs and looked into the kitchen as the yelling stopped. Mother was standing with her back against the fridge, her hands wrapped around the swearing jar. She had a nasty look on her face as she broke the red lid and letting it crumble into the jar. The house shook heavily, cracking the ceiling above me, sending dust below. I felt a pull come from my chest. It was like the drain at the bottom of a large pool. The frames on the wall tilted toward the kitchen, and I could see my horrified reflection in the glass as I screamed. But even that was eaten by the void. The walls clattered and utensils flew out of drawers as I grabbed the railing on the stairs, my hair licking the air when I looked up to see Billy's head completely inside the jar. I could tell he was screaming by the way his chest was heaving, the veins on the side of his neck turning green and blue as they thickened with blood. His feet flailed pitifully against the ground. I could see Mother's silhouette behind him, holding the jar as she watched. The mad gleam in her eye, shining as Billy's shoulders were tucked square against the lip, causing the suctioning to subdue for a blink. And then the crunching began. It was unlike anything I have ever heard before. At first his collarbone collapsed, and then his chest. I could hear his bones breaking as his tendons pulled and pushed their way down his torso toward his feet, as he was sucked inside the jar, his skin stretching like an overfilled garbage bag. I saw a piece of his skull travel to where his stomach had been, its edges straining against the skin, screaming as his insides ballooned to his foot. Then the entire thing squeezed down in a popping noise and made a pallid, pink lid that sat on top of the swearing jar. I ran up the stairs as Mother called after me. "Can you come into the kitchen?" she said. "There's something I want you to look at." I locked myself in the twins' bedroom and hid in their closet, watching the scraping of Mother's feet as she paced awkwardly outside, banging on the wood from time to time before her footsteps disappeared. I waited until morning as Susie began to stir before opening the door. For the next few days, Mother sat in the kitchen, never moving, the jar on the table. It was broken to pieces. Eventually, the sheriff and his deputy came to the house and took her in as a suspect for Mr. Braxton's disappearance, and later Billy's when he wasn't found. When I knew the counts against her wouldn't stick, I asked old John to dig near our house where we found the finger, and sure enough, he uncovered a body. It was my father's. That happened more than 40 years ago, and I had long put it behind me. But when I was watching the local news today, it featured a traveling artist that had come to town. They were known for restoring antiques. One of the techniques they employed was kintsugi, a Japanese method of pottery repair that involved the use of gold as a bonding agent. It wouldn't have been a big deal if I didn't recognize the woman in line, holding pieces of a broken jar in a plastic bag. An eerie smile plastered on her face as she turned and looked straight into the camera. My phone vibrated as a text message from Joe appeared. "Did you know they let her out?"